A Dream Upon a Rainy Stroll. Written by Magic Candle Queen. Read by Arashi. The blaring, blinding lights, the shouts, cheers, screaming of the crowds, the pain, numbing his person. He didn't realize that his wrist was grabbed and held up high, beyond the torrent of overwhelming senses racking through him. And the winner of tonight's match, adding to his long line of triumphs for the past 5 years, Meropede's Wolf, Wriothesley! The onslaught comes out tenfold, and for once, Wriothesley wishes it all to just fall silent.
Papa?
Wriothesley snapped out from his disassociation. After a moment of getting his bearings, he looks around with his blurred vision towards the setting sky of a motel room they just barely managed to rent for hopefully a few days. Turning his head, he fixates on a blob of light blue and pink pastel colors. Wriothesley smiles quietly at the sight.
Papa? Are you there?
The voice continued, and Wriothesley nodded his head, pulling the smaller figure closer into a hug, holding back a wince at the sting coming from his injured and bandaged knuckles, an arm from the previous night's boxing round. "I'm here, Duchess," he breathes.
Are you okay?
She asks in worry. "Don't worry, Sigewinne. I'll be fine," he assures, resting a hand on her head. She frowns, before hugging him again, and he hugs her back.
Papa?
"Yeah?"
You already know what I'm going to ask, aren't you?
Wriothesley sighs heavily, closing his eyes. "Yeah."
When do you think you can stop going to the boxing ring? You're only getting hurt, and the money you earn is just enough for us to rent out this motel room.
Sigewinne asks, getting smarter every day. "No idea. I could try and find myself a better suited job, but that's not going to happen with this horrid vision of mine." Wriothesley lets go, and sees his daughter move to sit next to him on the bed.
Then what am I able to do?
She asks. Wriothesley was silent, unsure how to answer. Even though he was her father, he was unfortunately a bit younger than most single parents, having found the girl alone when she was younger, and took her in as his own. And throughout taking care of the girl, he always wanted the best and the most for her and her future. But at the same time, that parental instinct kicks in at wanting to protect her. "Don't let anything stop you from trying to achieve your goal, Sigewinne," he says, looking at her and resting a hand on her head, gently stroking it. "So, what is it that you want to work at?" he inquired. Sigewinne hums in thought, looking down before looking back to him.
To take care of you, and take care of your injuries. I've read it on billboards and advertisements. A doctor or a nurse.
Wriothesley smiles weakly and bends over, bumping heads with her. "Then you best work hard for that dream of yours." Wriothesley smiles at the sound of Sigewinne's little giggle.
Monsieur Neuvillette?
The man glances over his shoulder to one of his employees entering his office.
We've received intended reports from the boxing ring. There's much more behind the scenes than we initially thought.
Neuvillette turns around and takes the offered files.
From the sole boxing ring we shut down and began investigating, we came to realize that there are other locations that are linked in a big chain.
"And all of these linked locations take part in underground boxing?" Neuvillette inquires.
We have yet to know, but personnel are speaking with them as we speak,
the employee says. Neuvillette looks at it for a moment before nodding his head. "All right, thank you. I'll keep these documents until this ordeal is resolved," Neuvillette says. The employee nods and leaves the room. He turns back around to look out the window of his office, sighing quietly as the moon had just come to the sky, lights filling the entire city like their own sea of stars. He sighs quietly and looks at his wristwatch. It could be lovely to see the actual stars afar into the country. Neuvillette looks at the documents, but it will be a long time until then. He hums quietly under his breath before shaking his head and going to get ready to leave. He took hold of the documents and skimmed through. Multiple locations of suspicion, majority proven true by some bystanders that were dragged into the underground matches. And looking through, it seems that the underground ring has their eyes on their boxers as well. He frowns at the sight of so many, all receiving barely even enough money. Seems these underground boxing matches have more behind them. His phone alarm suddenly rang, and he looked at the time. He sighs and puts the documents away and goes to gather his things to get ready to leave. But for a moment, he pauses and looks back at the list of boxers, some with pictures as well. One in particular, of steel gray, ice blue eyes, having almost a glazed-over look. He frowns again. The pattern of rain came in taps at first, barely noticeable, until it became a light drizzle to heavy sprinkling. Rain fell upon rooftops, store covers, umbrellas, the ground, or even people who didn't foresee the rainfall and were rushing to find cover, which is why Wriothesley was glad he managed to get enough money for a simple transparent shaded umbrella and stop using his old, battered black one. Making sure that Sigewinne was fast asleep in the motel room, he decided to go and get a surprise dinner for her. Enough for both of them. Hopefully not expensive, though. Wriothesley looked around the monochrome crowds and blares of light, but amongst the moving crowds, he noticed an apparent blob of white and blue just standing still. He squints, trying to force his vision to work with him, but nothing works in the end. With a huff, he walks up to the man, unsure on how to start the conversation. "Yes?" Wriothesley flinches when the man suddenly spoke, now likely facing him. Apologies," Wriothesley says firstly, making sure his umbrella was covering the stranger as well. "I just couldn't help but notice that you were standing out here in the rain. Don't you have an umbrella?" he asks. "No. I tend to somehow lose my umbrellas, so I just don't bother getting myself more," the man responds earnestly. "Huh. All right. Fair." Wriothesley shrugs his shoulders. There was an awkward silence before Wriothesley spotted the familiar purple and white lights of Sigewinne's favorite restaurant. "Well," he says, "since you said that the umbrellas you buy tend to go missing." As quickly as he could, he takes the man's hand and pushes the handle of his umbrella into their palm. "Huh? You can have mine. Have a nice evening." Wriothesley waves, before pulling his fur-ended black coat lined with red leather over his head as he hurries down the alleyway towards the restaurant, doing his best to dodge past oncoming passers-by. Neuvillette stares at the stranger, who had practically vanished into the crowd of black, and sighs quietly. He looks up at the transparent shaded umbrella, finding himself mesmerized by the raindrops falling and pattering on top of the shade, and yet none hit his person anymore. But thinking back for a moment to his conversation with the stranger, his glazed eyes and bandaged arms and knuckles, Neuvillette frowned slightly and went into his bag and pulled out the documents, coincidentally left open at the list of boxers. He sees the profile of the stranger from before, and frowns. To think such a kind man like him is in such a brutal struggle. "You're still here?" Quickly putting the documents back in his bag, he sees the man once more standing in front of him, coat now drenched from the hardening rainfall. Neuvillette stares, glancing at the food the man had beneath him, and holds the umbrella over them both. They stare at each other, the lights decorating their faces. "Thanks." The other smiles. "What is your name, by chance? I don't think I've seen you around these parts," Neuvillette asks. "Wriothesley," the stranger answers. "And, yeah, I'm somewhat new here." Neuvillette blinks, and Wriothesley looks back, raising an eyebrow. After a moment, the man realized what the other was waiting for, and coughed into his fist. "Neuvillette." "Oh, fancy," chuckles Wriothesley. Neuvillette looks at the man's state, and the rainfall around them. "Would you like me to bring you back to your place?" he asks. There's no need. It's just a quick run from here. I can... Without an umbrella? I'm unsure if the food under you right now would be edible by the time you get back. Neverlet points out. Ah, right. Wriothesley nervously smiles and laughs. I won't be wasting your time, no? I had just finished work. Rest assured, Neverlet says. All right, I'll stop stalling, Wriothesley says, and they turn around to start walking. It was quiet as they walked, neither talking, but as they did, Neverlet kept on glancing back at the other whenever Wriothesley would stumble or bump into something. Are you all right? Neverlet asks after the umpteenth time he ran into something. Don't worry about me. The Ravenet waves a hand. Just can't see properly. I'm used to bumping into things. Neverlet frowns, and it seemed that Wriothesley sensed it, looking back at him, his glazed eyes reflecting the white streetlight above them. Visually impaired. Have been for as long as I can remember. Neverlet frowns heavily and looks down. Wriothesley. I'm sorry. The younger one looked at him, stopping when the umbrella stopped. What do you mean? Wriothesley asks, confused. But Neverlet was silent, staring at the ground. Should he tell him? What if he would get angry at him? Neverlet didn't realize he was so absorbed in his thoughts that a hand grabbing his shoulder and a harsh shake later, Neverlet was staring at Wriothesley, who looked back. What's wrong? Why are you apologizing? We just met less than half an hour ago. He tries. Neverlet was silent. I work in building and lead numerous investigations, Neverlet says, and Wriothesley looks back calmly. Our recent investigations are related to numerous establishments who could be holding illegal underground boxing matches, and that there might be more than just that behind the scenes. Neverlet sighs quietly, while Wriothesley just hums, leaning back as his hand slipped from the older's shoulder. And I hear an and coming. And we were given a list of suspects from the owners of these establishments to the boxers. Ah, yes. Neverlet still looked down, as Wriothesley sighs. If you're going to arrest me, just say it. Wriothesley sighs. No. He looks at Neverlet, stunned to hear the answer slip from the man's lips so quickly and sternly. Wriothesley stares at the blue and white before him, and just barely, he could see a hue of deeper blue. His eyes? It looked a bit off blue, if you ask me, his thoughts comment. All right. So, what will happen in the end? Wriothesley inquires, resting a hand on his hip, the other still holding the food. If our suspicions are true, we would seize the location, and upon further investigations, shut down the establishment, Neverlet says. But unfortunately, we're trying our best to at least try and catch them in the act, but nothing's been working. Neverlet sighs. Wriothesley blinks and hums, resuming walking. Their walk was shrouded in silences, before Wriothesley sees the familiar blur of the motel further down the road. He glances at Neverlet, before smirking slightly. That's because they rotate amongst the different establishments. He whispers, making Neverlet look at him. There's going to be a match at the end of the week, at the major place. Wriothesley shoots the man a grin, before rushing off into the rain once more, making Neverlet panic and reach a hand out to him.
It's rare that you let us have ice cream, Papa,
Sigewinne comments, both her and Wriothesley walking down the sidewalk with ice cream in their hands. Well, I thought it's been a while since we last had something sweet. Wriothesley shrugs his shoulders. Sigewinne hums, before giggling brightly as she is playfully spun around.
I thought you had a match tonight,
she recalls, looking down. Declined it last week. Wriothesley shrugged his shoulders.
Why?
I checked our current savings, and word from a friend says that if I can get myself some prescription glasses, I can see normally, Wriothesley explains.
And how much do they cost?
Sigewinne tilts her head as they turn the corner. Average is 200. Usually it's between 50 to 1,000. Sejwin looks down, and Wriothesley glances at her, before smiling quietly. Don't worry, Duchess, he whispers, bending down and holding her carefully. When I get those glasses, there'll be more jobs open for me.
But it won't come to you overnight,
Sejwin points out. Yep, the harshness of reality, sighs Wriothesley. They walk for a long time, to the point that Sejwin fell asleep and resorted to Wriothesley to pick her up and resume walking. And wouldn't you know it, it started raining heavily. With a sigh, he hurried under a bus stop before it grew harsher, and pulled his coat over Sejwin as they sat down and waited. As they did, Wriothesley suddenly heard something, and looked up, and immediately squeezed his eyes shut, seeing bright, blaring red and blue lights. The rings of sirens startled him and Sejwin, along with the lightning overhead, and they just hear shouts and yelling coming from the building across from them. The boxing club. They stared in shock, before Wriothesley seized up at someone touching his shoulder. Wriothesley? He turned his head to face the stranger, and his eyes widened to see white and blue. What are you doing out here? Neverlet asks, confused. Wriothesley stares, before awkwardly coughing. Walking around with my daughter, Sejwin, he answers, motioning to his daughter, who stared at Neverlet with round eyes. The other man was silent, and Wriothesley blinked. Did you forget your umbrella again? He asks. No. The other shakes his head. It's inside my car right now, but bringing it out now would be wasteful.
What's going on?
Sejwin frowns, and Neverlet looks at the girl, and to Wriothesley. Word got out about illegal underground boxing in this establishment. Everyone inside is being taken into custody, Neverlet calmly said, and Sejwin's eyes widened and looked at Wriothesley, and he just smiled and looked at Neverlet. Efficient. I have to be. It's my job, Neverlet responds, and Wriothesley chuckles.
Papa?
Sejwin looks at him, and Wriothesley just smiles back at her.
Did you?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, it's illegal, first off, but secondly, you didn't feel comfortable with my continuing to box. You don't like seeing me hurt, Wriothesley answers, resting a hand on her head. Thought that it's about time to end it. Even with the noises and lights around them, it all seems to have fallen silent as they talked. Is there anything that I can repay you for? I cannot take no for an answer, Neverlet says suddenly, and Wriothesley just stares at him. He blinks again when Sejwin says,
Prescription glasses.
Glasses? Neverlet echoes.
Papa can't see correctly.
She looks down. Wriothesley panicked, assuring her that it was fine, before his breath was caught in his throat, when a hand gently tipped his chin, and Wriothesley, for once, clearly saw a face looking at him straight in the eye. Oddly feeling shy, Wriothesley kept flicking his gaze to the side, before looking back to see the man's attentive, clear blue eyes with a hint of grey. But other than their eyes, Wriothesley could clearly see a frown on their face. Unfortunately, I don't think a simple pair of eyeglasses can help fix his eyesight, Neverlet tells him, letting go of Wriothesley's chin. They're permanently damaged. Nothing can fix that. And that it could either get worse until blindness, or dealt with medically. Wriothesley sighs heavily, and looks down at the pavement as Sejwin looks between them.
You're a really pretty man, monsieur,
Sejwin suddenly spoke, making Wriothesley perk up slightly, glancing at her. Ah, thank you. Neverlet chuckles fondly at the little girl. But still, my offer still stands, Neverlet says. Wriothesley looks at him for a moment, and looks down, unsure of what to say. But then he feels Sejwin grab his hand and slowly move it. Next thing he knew, highlighted by the red and blue lights on the street, Wriothesley was holding Neverlet's. Sejwin, what are you? He sees his daughter whisper something into Nervalet's ear, and out comes a knowing, fond chuckle. Wriothesley didn't know what noise he made when Nervalet brought his other hand to rest over Wriothesley's holding hand. "Would you like to come with me for dinner?" Wriothesley could feel himself short-circuiting while Sigewinne giggles. "Traitor!" Wriothesley panics internally, face rushing red in seconds. "How dare you get behind my back and set me up with someone?"
Nervalet, we need to return back.
It was almost as if that voice broke the quiet around them, and Wriothesley was bombarded with the ringing sirens. "All right. Thank you again," Nervalet says, his hand slipping from Wriothesley's. The Ravenet blinks, not realizing that he physically drooped with a sad pout on his face, then flinches when something slipped into his hands. An umbrella and card. "What?" Wriothesley stammers, looking at the man before stilling completely when something pressed the crown of his head. "I'm returning your umbrella back, and I have given you my card as well. If you would like to continue talking, you can just come to the building and inform the secretary at the front desk," Nervalet says, before slipping away. Wriothesley sat still, long after the police cars took their sirens and lights away with them.
What?
Both Navia and Clorand shout in unison, both practically leaning over Nervalet's desk that he had to lean further back into his chair. "Now is not the time." He tries to defuse the situation.
Nope. You are sitting on that chair, and you're going to tell us the tea that we just missed last night.
Navia refuses with a shake of her head. What was Wriothesley even doing in the location? He wasn't on for the night. Clorand asks.
Yes, you said it yourself,
Navia adds, both ladies looking at him with curious eyes. Nervalet just sighs heavily, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Wriothesley was just in the neighborhood. He and his daughter, Sigewinne," he says.
"Daughter?"
Navia echoes. "Yes, daughter." Silence. "You are a family person," Clorand recalls. "Besides the point," Nervalet sternly says, making them both look back, though Navia was grinning ear to ear. "I was unfortunately called away to continue managing the situation, thinking that I was done for the night. So, I gave him back his umbrella and a card if he were to continue talking to me."
"The clear one?"
Navia blinks. "Yes, that was his." Nervalet nods his head. There was a sudden knock on the door, and they look over to see a young woman peeking inside.
"Monsieur Nervalet, someone is here to see you,"
she says. "Thank you, Sidine. You can let them in." Nervalet nods his head. The woman nods and holds the door open further, and both Clorand and Navia stare at the man in question. Wriothesley stepping inside the room, with Sigewinne hiding right behind his feet. "Wriothesley," Nervalet greets, a bit surprised. "Afternoon, Nervalet." Wriothesley smiles and looks at the pair of women, who are...
"We're not important."
Navia happily smiles.
"But I'm Navia, and this is Clorand. We're employees of Nervalet, but all three of us are good friends."
She hurries past, now just peeking into the room with a smile on her face.
"Now, I shouldn't get in the way of your conversation. Sigewinne, right?"
The little one looked at her.
"Would you like to come with us?"
Sigewinne blinks and looks at Wriothesley, who looks at Nervalet in turn. The man simply smiles and motions to the blonde, and Sigewinne hugs Wriothesley before hurrying over to Navia. The door closes, and Wriothesley turns back around to Nervalet, who got up from his seat and walked around his desk to him. "Hey!" Wriothesley breathes, smiling slightly. Nervalet smiles fondly at the other, gazing into the man's glazed eyes. "Hello again, Wriothesley."